when people come and read this report, what do you want them to walk away with?
Is the only way that we can defeat the far right is by community self-defense. Targeted communities, Muslim communities, migrant communities, LGBTQ communities, the communities of disabled people. They need to be organizing and mobilizing to resist this as communities. But I also mean neighborhoods.
Antifa. We all know the name. It's a very well-known group at this point in time. I spoke to Andy from Antifa today, Montreal Antifa. They recently published a report called The Current Situation of the Far Right in Quebec in 2026. It is a long report. It is a detailed report. They name names, point at trends over the last few years in Quebec, and just talk about the general ecosystem of the far right in Quebec. I thought this interview was really informative. I learned a lot about who these groups are, how they're moving, who's overlapping with who in what group. They're all rubbing shoulders, rubbing elbows, but thankfully, Montreal Antifa has been keeping a close eye on them, and Andy came on to share a bit with our audience today. Here's the interview. Hello, everyone. My name is Kalden Dhatsenpa. I'm the host of Local 514. And today, I'm speaking with someone I believe to be an Antifa super soldier. Is that right?
There is no such thing as an Antifa super soldier. The anti-fascist movement, when it's working at its best, is, by definition, normal people defending their communities.
There we go, folks. No such thing as a super soldier. Well, that's the interview today. I'm just kidding. So today I have on Andy from Montréal Antifasciste to speak on a report that MAF put out on the current status, the state of the far right in Quebec, and what the landscape looks like. It's quite the detailed report.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's an overview, I think, that thoroughly will tell you what's going on the far right in Montreal and in Quebec, and to some degree give you an idea of what you can expect to come in the coming years.
Yeah, totally. I've always respected all the stuff Antifa here in Montreal does on sort of, I guess, just really shining the light on these far-right groups and formations and sort of keeping an eye on them. So, I mean, let's just get right into this report, I guess. It's been a few years since the last one, but, I think, zooming out, what do you think is the biggest change from the last report, or would you go back even further?
I mean, I would say that if you're going to look at the arc of the far right in Montreal and in Quebec, you have to go back to 2017. You have to go back to when the major anti-migrant and Islamophobic movements first sprung up. Pegida, but it was short-lived. La Meute, Storm Alliance, and the Soldiers of Odin would be the key groups in that period. And what they were attempting to achieve was the shutting of the borders to particularly third world immigration, particularly immigration from the Muslim world. And they did so primarily in the form of demonstrations, often either on Roxham Road or at the border crossing at Saint Bernard de l'École, occasionally in Montreal or Quebec City. And our response, in fact, it was what brought Montréal Antifasciste into existence. Our response was, that can't happen. You can't be at the border harassing migrants. We counter-demonstrated. There was some doxing. They weren't a group that particularly required doxing because they were fairly open about their membership. We blocked their demonstrations fairly successfully, I would say 90% of the time. Quebec City was a famous incident where they never got out of a parking lot. They had another incident in Montreal where they never got out of a parking lot. Down at the border, we would usually be able to push them back so that they weren't bothering, which was all they could really do, bothering migrants crossing the border. And they're gone now, though. And they're gone because, not because we defeated them. Certainly we contributed to their defeat. They also suffered from very public sex scandals, women in their organizations talking about men in their organizations sexually assaulting them. They did a lot of that on Facebook, so it became very public very quickly. There was also allegations of financial malfeasance in both organizations, in both Storm Alliance and AMIT. And they, ultimately though, I think what killed those organizations is they got yes for an answer. The CAC pretty much put in place what they were demanding. They lowered levels of immigration. They had Bill 21, which, while allegedly is to prevent religious from minorities or any religion from exhibiting its religion in public, we all know it's an anti-hijab law. That is the major, Muslim women are the major people affected by this particular law. It gave them kind of no reason at a certain point to continue existing. Soldiers of Odin is a gnarlier issue because they were essentially neo-Nazis based in an organization that began in Finland. And while they had the same demands, they were much more inclined to a bonehead aesthetic and a, if not violent approach, a violent aesthetic. They, however, ran into serious pushback from the anti-fascist movement and eventually simply left the city. Went to Quebec City, where they had an alliance of sorts with Atalante, and at that point disappeared.
Mm-hmm. So of these groups like 10 years ago, which ones do you think are still around? Is there any of them that are really active anymore?
No, none of them are really around anymore. The Lemut people attempted to rebrand, some of the Lemut people attempted to rebrand something called the Falfada during the COVID crisis, basically an anti-health protocols organization. They participated in the Freedom Convoy. They at one point blocked the Louis Hippolyte Tunnel as a protest. They were arrested. They all got, as I recall, 6-month suspended sentences, and that was the last we heard of them. The neo-Nazi organizations, Atalante, and predating Atalante, the Fédération du Québécois de Souche, the latter, the Fédération du Québécois de Souche, recently folded, publicly issued a statement that it was disbanding. And Atalante also got a lot of pushback from the anti-fascist movement, a lot of doxing, their members beginning to have trouble with their jobs when they were exposed, their attempts to rally publicly not really succeeding that well, and I think not of small consequence, aging as well. They started to get married, to have families, to buy their houses in the burbs. So although they've never officially disbanded, there's been nothing from them in several years now.
I think it's an interesting point that you mentioned how some of these groups, it's not necessarily that they're entirely defeated, it's more that their raison d'etre was sort of like put into question when the governing party in Quebec was just sort of platforming a lot of that kind of anti-immigrant and anti-migrant kind of rhetoric, right? Because it's like when you mention that, I'm like, oh man, that's what everyone is talking about right now. You know, that to me, it's still the conversation at such a degree that every party's talking about it. That you see even like parties that used to be like at the federal level that used to be so openly pro-immigration, right? Like the Liberals, who they've even shifted, right, because of that growing kind of sentiment.
I mean, I think there are several consequences to that. We'll go into an election in October here where that's really going to be what the two main parties, the CAC and the PQ, structure their campaign around. That's problematic. There are currently a lot of economic problems in Quebec and the world, but in Quebec as well. There's food insecurity. There's a lack of housing. There's the threat that AI is now posing to people's employment. And I can go on and on. We're mostly familiar with these problems.
Our viewers know all of them very well.
And these are problems that these governments are not addressing and are unlikely to begin addressing before the election. They will divert entirely to this issue of migrants and Muslims and LGBTQ plus people, particularly the anti-trans campaigns that have become so popular. And we need to find some way to shift that dynamic. We need to find some way to have the discussion around the issues that actually affect us.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's get into this report. So I think, thank you for kind of describing the scenario on the ground 10 years ago. A lot of those groups have sort of either disbanded or become inactive. And I'm kind of curious, what are the new groups, that has sort of taken the spotlight in the Quebec far right?
I think it represents the shift. It's important we should finish with how this shift occurred. There was a shift from an anti-migrant, anti-Muslim sentiment that has not in any way gone away. But the new groups have chosen an approach to the issue of an ethno-nationalism. Ethno-nationalism is obviously de facto anti-migrant. It is de facto anti-Muslim. But bigger than that, it allows for a discourse to develop around the idea that there should be, that there once was an ideal Quebec and it was all francophone and it was all white. And if we want to address all the problems in the world, we have to return to that white francophone Quebec. And that's become the key focus, and I would say the key organizations pushing that focus at this point. One of them, a web TV station, Nomos TV, which is very close ideologically to the French Nouvelle Droite, to the idea that you affect political change by changing the social dialogue, or what's become a popular term, moving the Overton window. Nomos TV exists simply to have a dialogue be normalized around the idea that Quebec should be French, that Quebec should be white, that anything that is not francophone, that is not white, threatens a heritage that is constantly under assault. It's under assault from the federal government. It's under assault from Anglophones within the province, and particularly under assault from immigrants and Muslims. And then you have on the ground, using the same basic rhetoric, Nouvelle Alliance, basically a youth group that attempts to put boots in the street around the same issue, and that has an organic tie to Nomos TV. It grows out of an organization called the Fédération Québec Français, I think it was. They were in any event a traditionalist Catholic, Fédération Canadien Français, and they were a traditionalist Catholic far-right organization, and a lot of their membership simply patched over into Nouvelle Alliance. Nouvelle Alliance is essentially a continuation of that group, and that group was always close to Nomos TV. In fact, I would suggest that Nomos TV ideologically shapes that group in many ways. They tried to demonstrate just several weeks ago on Journée des Patriotes. They demonstrated at the Dollar des Homos statue in La Fontaine Park. They do that annually on that day, and the anti-fascist movement, not MAF, but an organization called FRAP, to which I will return in a moment, the anti-fascist movement with its allies attempts to block that demonstration. And last year we blocked it effectively by preventing it from happening by occupying the space. This year we weren't successful in occupying the space, but we had a very large noise demonstration that meant they couldn't be heard. They also attempt to march in the Société Saint-Jean-Baptiste parade every year, where they are at least theoretically not welcome. And there they get pushback not only from the anti-fascist movement, but from the left of the nationalist movement, particularly a group called We Quebec. And this year they were blocked, as they were the previous year, from marching. Actually, the previous year they were blocked from marching. This year, the attempt to block them from joining the rally was successful, but the police prevented the anti-fascist movement and We Quebec from preventing them from marching and formed a 3-bicycle cop cordon between them and the main body of the demonstration.
Just to describe again, the police helped prevent them from being blocked?
No, yes, the police prevented us from blocking them.
Oh, interesting.
Joining the actual parade. The parade they're theoretically not welcome at, and the Société Saint-Jean-Baptiste, CAC was involved, QS was involved. They claim they do not want these people there, but for them, simply 3 cops on bicycles between them and Nouvelle Alliance was enough.
Right.
So Nouvelle Alliance effectively joined the demonstration.
Just with a small buffer.
Barely a buffer.
Yeah, hardly.
So those, I would say, would be the 2 main groups now. And if you're looking at the ideological component, then I would say the key person you have to look at is Mathieu Bock-Côté, who writes for the Journal de Montréal, and who's also very close to the French far right. Both he and André Cormier-Denis, who's the chief person with Nomos, have made visits to France and done interviews with the Nouvelle Droite in France in the last 6 months. Mathieu Bock-Côté's key objective is, and something he hammers away at constantly, is the idea that there is no far right, that it is an invention of the anti-fascist movement, and that in reality, the anti-fascist movement is the form at which fascism takes in the current period. He profoundly Islamophobic, profoundly anti-migrant. I remember with some amusement a newspaper article he wrote, I guess 3, maybe 4 summers back, about taking a walk. He lives somewhere in the plateau. Taking a walk and being horrified to find groups of African men drumming and dancing in the park. An invasion of our culture, a destruction of our culture. It is for all of these people this idea that anything that is not French and Quebecois, and in fact they usually use the term French-Canadian, is a destruction of a culture. That what I would say is the basis on the ground right now.
For all these different groups.
All these different groups fall under this ethno-nationalist banner and are the key element of the far right. And again, I think it's necessary to point out that their rhetoric turns up in the rhetoric of the 2 key parties in Quebec, the CAQ and the PQ. Legault has talked very warmly about Mathieu Bock-Côté and recommended that people read his books. Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon recently gave an interview to Rebel
News, yeah.
This is an attempt on their part to normalize what 10 years ago would have been seen as an unacceptably far-right discourse.
And making space for that, normalizing that kind of discourse. I think, so you're saying that they were getting this kind of tactic, right? This new far-right is getting this tactic from France, it sounds like, of trying to...
The meta-political shift that Nomos TV is attempting to effect comes right out of the playbook of the Nouvelle Droite in France. Nouvelle Alliance does not engage in that level of intellectual discussion. It's a boots-on-the-street group. But Bock-Côté, Nomos TV, and perhaps the intelligentsia within the PQ and CAQ are concerned about affecting this metapolitical shift in how we understand reality.
Okay. I have a question for you. I guess with this, the report starts with this really great, broad overview of the right around the world, right? You talk about what's going on in Ukraine, Israel, of course the U.S. I'm kind of curious, what sets the Quebec far right apart from other far right formations around the world?
I mean, the broad strokes are the same everywhere.
Of course, yeah. I mean, the anti-migrant stuff.
Anti-migrant, Islamophobic, anti-LGBTQ, special focus on trans people, attacks on disabled people, cutting the necessary resources, and even sometimes what could be seen as eugenic programs. Basically, the targeting of marginalized people. And the Nouvelle Droite in France realized after the defeat of the bonehead fascist movement in the 80s and 90s that that wasn't going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Put a suit and tie on it, educate it,
Dress it up a little.
Develop a theory, and the key components of that have come out of France that are very important to our discussion. The key component would be Renaud Camus' remigration, and why am I gapping on the term? Anyway, it'll come back to me.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I guess after, when the report is all said and done, I'm kind of curious, it seems like there's this kind of new wave of right-wingers coming in. I'm kind of wondering where you and perhaps the Montreal Antifascists' main concern is, if there's one kind of hotspot among them that you think is most concerning.
Most concerning, it depends whether you're talking about the far right or the institutional right. If you're talking about the far right, the most concerning are the expressions of ethno-nationalism, which right now it's Nouvelle Alliance. You have the boneheads still exist. You have the Second Son spectacle that occurred in Shawinigan 2 weekends back.
What did you make of that, real quick?
I mean, what I make of it is, first of all, what was immediately clear was it got a very bad reception across the board. Even the mainstream parties that are on board with the overall anti-migrant, Islamophobic thing felt obliged to publicly denounce that. The PQ denounced it. CAC denounced it. The Liberal Party of Canada denounced it. Polyev even had a soft denunciation of it. All of the mainstream media denounced it. And on the face of it, that of course is good. But the other side of that equation is 2 Fridays ago, nobody in Quebec had ever heard of the Second Sons. For 2 weeks thereafter, everybody was talking about the Second Sons. The Second Sons have managed through this particular incident to insert themselves in the political discussion in Quebec. And it's important to note, actually, that on that same day, the Second Sons had a similar demonstration in Halifax. So what I think that means, I think we can expect, the Second Sons, basically a Southern Ontario neo-Nazi organization, is attempting to expand. It's attempting to move out of Ontario and become a Canada-wide organization. And I think in that light, we can expect to see more activity from the Second Sons and neo-Nazis this summer. The Second Sons have always had a close relationship in Montreal with the Frontenac Active Club, a bonehead, mixed martial arts, planning for the revolution club. And I wouldn't be surprised to see an actual chapter of the Second Sons grow out of this exercise. Now, the key person involved in this in Montreal is a man named Sean Beauvais-McDonald. If something involves neo-Nazis in Quebec, Sean Beauvais-McDonald will be there. He was in Charlottesville for Unite the Right. He did security for Lemut until they moved him out because of the politics he came with. He did some Atalante stuff in Montreal. He sometimes just wanders the streets harassing people of color, Jews. He was clearly the key organizer of the event in Shawinigan. This all bears watching. This, I think, we will be seeing more of this summer. This was not a one-off event.
I'm kind of wondering, when people come and read this report, what do you want them to walk away with?
The key message the anti-fascist movement always wants you to walk away with is the only way that we can defeat the far right is by community self-defense. And when I say community self-defense, I mean that in two senses. Targeted communities, Muslim communities, migrant communities, LGBTQ communities, the communities of disabled people. They need to be organizing and mobilizing to resist this as communities. But I also mean neighborhoods, where to some degree these communities cross over. Neighborhoods need to be organizing to keep these people out of their neighborhood, to shut these people down wherever they appear. And that's one level of it. The other level of it, however, is always going to be this institutional far right, the CAC, the PQ. That requires a different approach. That requires a mass movement. To have a mass movement, all of those communities have to work together. The unions have to be involved. Progressive individuals have to be involved. Community groups have to be involved. Basically, we all need to be involved. And starting a year ago, there was movement in that direction. There is a new anti-fascist organization called the Front Antifasciste Populaire, FAP, or often just the Front Pop. And it's an organization that's open to people in a way that Montréal Antifasciste isn't. It's an organization that I recommend your viewers check out on Instagram. It's an organization that we need to build so that we are ready, not only for this election that's coming in October, but that we are ready to push back against the far right consistently whenever it raises its ugly head.
Terrific. With the election coming up, what are your outlooks on that election so far?
In what sense?
Just what are you expecting from it, I guess?
I'm expecting a PQ-CAC race to the bottom of racism and anti-LGBTQ sentiment. I'm just expecting a lot of far-right rhetoric.
Right. That continuing, seeing what else is platformed and mainlined. I had another question. Hold on. It's somewhere locked in my brain here.
And by the way, the term I couldn't think of earlier, Renaud Camus, the French theory that has become so important worldwide, is the Great Replacement.
I think Antifa, to some degree, is sort of a household name, in both in a good sense and a bad sense, right? Everyone is sort of aware of it because of, I guess, all the talk about it in like mainstream news over the last few years. I'm kind of wondering what are some like misconceptions about Antifa, about Montreal Antifa, and then Antifa.
I mean, I don't think Montréal Antifasciste is any different than any other anti-fascist group. The common misconceptions, I mean, you raised one, I think, jokingly at the beginning, the Antifa super soldier, that we are roaming the streets, baseball bat in hand, looking for people to beat. We aren't. We're mostly like everybody else in the society sitting behind our computers, trying to figure out what's going on. The idea that we want to undermine the entire fabric of Western society. No, we don't. I mean, and in fact, we exist only, we are not what I would consider a primary group. We exist to address a social problem, the rise of the far right and fascism. We take out the garbage so other groups doing important political work can do so without all of the harassment. Yeah.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation. I guess we're coming a little close to the end here, but I'm kind of wondering, are just for in a kind of general public facing sense, are there any kind of misconceptions you run into about now the fascists and the far right? Do people have a warped idea of what they are versus what Antifa is seeing?
I mean, I think one of the errors people make is thinking they're not significant. they're just little groups. And that's dangerous for two reasons. They may be just little groups, but we have seen how these small groups have shifted in the last decade the entire social dialogue around migration and Islam. Also, we know historically that little groups, with the correct sequence of events, little groups can become big, powerful groups very quickly. The easiest history to point to is always the history of Germany. Or, closer to home, in 2016, a reality TV, minor reality TV star with a history of misogyny and a propensity for making ridiculous statements could win the presidency didn't seem plausible. Well, we're in our second term, and we wouldn't be having this conversation if that hadn't happened. In fact, that boosted the far right worldwide. So yes, the idea that they're marginal and will remain marginal is always an error. In fact, it is why when they are marginal, that we need to squash them.
No, wonderful. Yeah, it seems the most opportune moment. I think. You seem to mention it before, but if people are interested in squashing them and resisting, what would you recommend?
Organize in your communities, both your social communities and your geographical community, and definitely pay attention to what this local group, FRAP, Front Antifasciste Populaire, the Front Pop, is doing, and if not joining that organization, at least join its campaigns.
Wonderful. Well, we'll have all the relevant links available in the description for that. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Andy?
No. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me.
Of course. Thank you for coming on and sharing about the work Antifa Montreal is doing.
And thank you for your work, too.
Look at that. Thank you, folks. That's today's interview. Thank you so much for listening, and catch you next time.